Amen, guys. Hey, why don't you guys have a seat? Give it up for the worship band. Thank you, guys. That's so cool, so awesome. Hey, so tonight's gonna be a little bit different. You guys see that you're in circles, and you're in circles for a reason. But we began our night kind of talking about different fears, right? So you had to stick your hand into a box. You're not sure what was in that box. And some of you overcame a lot of your fears. But the type of fear that I really want to focus on today is a different type of fear, okay? The type of fear I want to focus on is the type of fear that comes when you think about the future. The type of fear that you have when you're in an awesome relationship, where you're dating someone, it's awesome. But then you start to feel this dread, this insecurity. You start to have these dreams of your boyfriend or your girlfriend cheating on you, right? It's that type of fear that I'm talking about. The type of fear I'm talking about is when you hear that your company is downsizing and you're worried because you know that your colleague that you sit next to every single day is way more indispensable than you are. And so you start comparing your qualifications and you try to find some reason for why they should keep you instead of your colleague. That's the type of fear I'm talking about, the fear of the future. We all have different reasons for being scared of the future, but what is it for you? Yeah. So I want you right now to turn to your circle groups, actually close the circle groups in, because I want you to discuss this in your groups, okay? I don't know if you came with your friend or you came by yourself or you came with your care group, but you're about to get to know your neighbors pretty well tonight. So for you introverts, I'm sorry, you can this might be the fear that you have to conquer today, okay? But turn to your neighbors, and I want you to discuss this question. What is really simple, actually, share your names, right? Hi, I'm Kevin. And then what is something in the future, the first question, that scares you? So turn to your groups now, spend the next few minutes talking about what is something, one thing in the future that scares you. Let's do that right now. The question is not just the name, but what are you scared of in the future? All right, take a few more minutes. All right, so you may not have gotten through everybody. I hear some laughter. That's always good, I think, for a serious question. I heard up here that someone was afraid of taxes, so I don't know. That's something. But continue to be in your table groups. I want you to discuss the second question. And the question is this: why does that thing in the future make you so anxious? Think about the fear that you guys shared. Why does it make you anxious? And as a table, as a group, come up with a common theme for why you think the fear in the future makes you anxious, and then pick someone to be a representative to then share, okay? Does that make sense? Everyone's shaking their head. I'm pushing a lot of you out of your comfort zone today, but talk about this question, then come up with one representative who can share what you guys kind of talked about, okay? Why does that fear make you anxious? All right, guys. All right, so hey, I'm gonna ask for a few volunteers to kind of share. There will be Josh and Danny will have a mic in the middle of the crowd. So if you feel brave enough to kind of share how you guys answered the second question, just raise your hand and the mic will come to you, okay? So can I have a brave volunteer raise their hand and kind of share about, okay, we got one right there. All right. Someone got voluntold. What's your name?
My name is Adeline.
Oh, Mike.
My name is Adeline.
Hi, Adeline.
Hi, Kevin. So yeah, why does our future make us anxious? And I think just from what I hear from my group, mainly it's about I think change, something new, and I think a lot of us feel the same about being uncertain about the future. And I think some of us shared a bit about having new responsibilities or kind of fear of not having control over our future. So I think the main theme was new changes, and uncertainty about these new changes, and kind of not really having control or enough time over these changes. That makes us mainly anxious about the future.
That's really good. Come on, give it up. Yeah. Definitely fear the constant change. We're definitely in a season where there's lots of changes, and it can cause a lot of uncertainty. Awesome. Anyone else? There's a hand back there.
Sam. Bill.
Yes, I'm Samuel.
Hi, Samuel.
And I'm sorry, Kevin. I think my group is too small. I think they kind of spoiled tonight's theme already.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Okay.
we also talk about uncertainty, like when things go out of control. So, for example, death. They don't know when death comes to you or come to the people you love and care. Especially when like things like you're totally prepared for it. Like someone that said, well, you feel lack of power like of your agenda. And when you feel so powerless, you feel like that kind of like you're so hopeless in those situations.
Yeah, that's good. Hey, thank you, man. Yeah, so definitely when you feel like you're powerless to change anything. Anyone else? Okay.
I guess, okay, my name is Victoria. And
Hi, Victoria.
Hi, Kevin. Yeah, so we talked about like the common theme was lack of control and how like that affects you. Some people think it's to do with failure, like if you can't achieve what you set out to achieve and you feel like there's no control over it, then you're kind of in a situation where you feel like you couldn't do it. You know, it's like your value is diminished over that. And I think somebody else had other opinions, like.
What's your name, sir?
Hi, Nabil.
Nabil.
We talked about how the lack of control also derives from your desires. So if you wanted something, therefore there's a possibility of unsuccessfulness, and then because you're out of control, then there's the fear. So we talked about the desire and whether God wants us to have that, or is it just out of our own what we want.
That's good. So good. Yeah, it definitely comes from a desire for success or desire for something, and then a lack of control to be able to achieve that. Well, that's the night, guys. You guys preached the whole thing. Can maybe one more group can share? Just one more group.
Kevin, pick
Oh,
someone.
back there. Yeah, John Luke.
What makes me anxious? Leading worship if I've cracked my voice or
Yeah, that's the
hit
worst.
the wrong note.
Yeah,
Forget the lyrics.
yeah.
I mean, well, in all honesty, like our group was just talking about it just now. One of them said they were scared of being like an adult. Like,
Oh, dang.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So we have a younger crowd in our
Okay,
in
yeah.
our group, but yeah.
Well, they should come up here because up here they're talking about taxes. So,
What's that?
yeah. Who wants that? Adulting, right?
All right.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Hey, so you guys, like, I think y'all have really keyed in on a lot of the different areas of fear that we kind of want to focus on. But I think you guys established this, that there's really something deeper that's going on, right? It's quite hard to pinpoint, but at the deepest level of our fears is about the future is probably something else. And here's the issue. I think we never truly get at that deeper level. We just kind of stay at a superficial level. Like, let's say you're nervous about an exam you got to take. At the surface level, you might say that you're worried about not performing well. That's up here, right? But maybe you take it one step deeper and you realize that your fears are centered around perhaps your life plan going off course. If you do well on this exam, you get this internship, you get this job, you get this promotion, then you're here at age 35, right? That's your life plan. And then I think at an even deeper level, your fear might be centered around maybe losing this dream that you had for your life. There's something deeper going on. These fears about the future and about uncertainty can be paralyzing when we cannot identify the root causes of these fears. And what we hope to do over the next few months, maybe 2 or 3 months, is to talk about the different root causes of fear. And what I want to do today, and specifically key in on, and I think 2 or 3 of your groups keyed in on this issue. I think this is one of the most common root causes for fear. I actually think it's like the foundation of foundations for fear. I think everything else is built on top of this when it comes to our fears, and it is this. It is the loss of control, right? The loss of control, exactly what your group said. We're going to be reading a parable tonight from the Gospel of Matthew. And while this parable doesn't explicitly mention fear, I think it talks about this idea of control very well. So Matthew chapter 21, verse 33 to 39, this is a parable that is directed towards the religious leaders of Jerusalem. And let me give you a little bit of context for when this parable is told. So Jesus is coming into Jerusalem. And Jesus comes into Jerusalem in the very last week of his ministry. He rides into Jerusalem like a triumphant king. We celebrate it as Palm Sunday. Everybody celebrates this day, right? And he comes in, and you half expect Jesus to be doing the same types of miracles that he had been doing for his whole entire ministry. By the way, he spent most of his ministry outside of Jerusalem. Most of it was in a region called Galilee. So you're half expecting Jesus to be doing the same miracles, like healing the blind, giving, multiplying bread, walking on water. You're half expecting these awesome miracles. But what is it that Jesus does when he comes into Jerusalem? He goes to the temple, and he sees that there are money changers there. There are people turning the temple into a marketplace, and he tosses the tables. And then he leaves the temple, and he sees a fig tree. And in one of the more bizarre miracles of Jesus' ministry, he curses the fig tree, and it dies, okay? And so, by the way, the fig tree represents Israel. So think about that a little bit, chew on that. But so he goes into Jerusalem, he tosses the tables, he curses the fig trees, he rebukes the religious leaders, and it is as he is rebuking the religious leaders that he tells this parable. Matthew chapter 21, verse 33. Listen to another parable. There was a landowner who planted a vineyard. He put a wall around it, dug a wine press in it, and built a watchtower. Then he rented the vineyard to some farmers and moved to another place. When the harvest time approached, he sent his servants to the tenants to collect his fruit. By the way, Jesus often taught in parables. So parables are stories. This story didn't actually happen. It's a fictional story that Jesus tells to make a point. Right? Parables are stories that make a point. And for us to understand the point that Jesus is trying to make, you really have to put yourselves in the shoes of the original hearers of that message. And who is he directing this towards? He's directing this towards the Jewish religious leaders. Now, back in that day, you would have been, these religious leaders would have been fairly rich, okay? It actually paid very well to be in ministry. So, man, I'm born in the wrong generation. But so they would have been rich, and they would have not all, but most of them would have owned land outside of Jerusalem. So they would have understood that this was a common practice. People would often set up vineyards and then lease it out to tenants who would then be responsible for producing the crop. There would have been an agreement, some sort of agreement between the owner and the tenant over what proportion of the crop would go to the owner and what proportion of the crop would then go to the tenant for the tenant to live off of. And typically, it would take around 4 years for a vineyard to begin producing fruit. Okay, 4 years. So these workers would have worked the land for 4 entire years. And finally, when the first harvest came, they were to take the crop and give it to the representatives of the owner. That's the practice. But watch what they do. Verse 35. The tenants seized his servants. They beat one, killed another, and stoned a third. So not so good. But the owner then gives them a second chance. Verse 36. Then he sent other servants to them, more than the first time, and the tenants treated them the same way. You almost have to stop and think, what could have possibly prompted these tenants to act in the way that they do? The owner isn't asking for all the fruit, okay? The owner is just asking what they had originally agreed to. So had things gotten so bad that these tenants felt like the only thing they could really do, they were backed into the corner, that the only thing they could do was to lash out and kill the servants of the owner. What could prompt that? Could it be that after over 4 years of working the land, cultivating the land, using the watchtower and the walls to defend against looters and pests that would come and eat the crops, after 4 years of doing this every single day, that they got it into their heads that this land belonged to them? And here's one of the greatest fallacies, the greatest lies that we will ever believe in: that the things we have, we own because we worked so hard for them. Say that again. The greatest lie we will ever tell ourselves is that the things we own, the relationships we have, the talents that you're born with, all of these things belong to us because we have worked so hard for them. See, whether we believe it or not, this is the world that we believe in. This is the world that we live in. And this is the narrative that we're told. We deserve what we get. We earn our keep and we keep our share. That's just the way things work. So you're rich because you worked your way up the ladder. You put yourselves in the right place. You networked with the right people. And when people wasted their weekends doing whatever, coming to night shifts, you were there working overtime. And after a while, you start to believe that the wealth that you have accrued is yours and yours alone. Maybe another example is, you think that you have friends or you have your social standing because of your great personality. You grew up reading joke books and memorizing jokes, and it's paid off because now you, Greg, are the life of the party, right? And you start to believe that these friendships and this social standing that you've acquired is yours and yours alone. It's not just about money, right? See, when we buy into the lie that we are entitled to things because we work so hard at them, we start to take this posture, being closed-fisted about our things. It's where we prize the things that we have worked so hard for that we are unwilling to let go of them. And that's problematic because God doesn't give you things for you to keep. I think we all know that, but he really doesn't. Nothing that he's given to you, we are meant to keep. He demands fruit. So let's keep reading. Matthew 21, verse 37. Last of all, he sent his son to them. They will respect my son, he said. But when the tenants saw the son, they said to each other, this is the heir. Come, let's kill him and take his inheritance. So they took him and threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. So the owner is running out of options, and all of his servants are killed. So he then sends his son. And when the son goes, he goes with all the authority of the father. And so to reject the son is to reject the father, but that's precisely what they do. And in fact, they take it one step further because they end up killing him, because it was their chance to control their destiny. And they could officially take ownership of this land. I think it's safe to say that every human being desires control over their lives, right? A powerful book that I'd recommend all of you to read is a book by Kate Bowler called Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lies I've Told. That's the book. It's actually sold out in the Quench bookstore. Can't buy it right now. You can go on Sunday to buy it. But essentially, long story short, this is an autobiography of a woman who is very successful. She is a very successful professor. And she had also been struggling all her life to try and conceive a child. And she finally is able to get pregnant, and she gives birth to a son, and everything seems to be falling in place for this woman. And then she is diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer, which has a survival rate of 14%. And in one diagnosis, all control in her life is lost, and all her plans, her dreams of seeing her little child grow up is gone. It's a powerful book. But she says this one line in her book, which I think aptly applies to all of us. She says, "Control is a drug, and we are all hooked." Let me say that again. Control is a drug, and we are all hooked. I think it's true. We love control. We love our little kingdoms. Kingdom is the domain of the king. It's our little domain where we control the outcome of everything. It's why it's so easy for us to idolize money, because money is the closest thing in this world to give you that sense of control. Because if you have the money, you can buy what you need, you can feed your family, you can give yourself, and you can give your kids the opportunities in the future. But regardless, we love control. And let me be frank with you for a second, okay? I don't think there's a lot of certainty in the future for us. There isn't. It seems like no matter where you are in the world, not just in Hong Kong, I'm saying wherever you are in the world, there's discontent and anxiety among young adults, like to a level that's never been felt before. And you can't blame us, right? We just went through, we're still going through a global pandemic in the prime of our lives. We should be out there hanging out, going partying, doing all these things, doing great things in the workplace, but we can't because there's a global pandemic. And then there are all sorts of young people protesting different injustices all the world. There's injustices everywhere. And nobody really has any optimism for the future because, to be honest, there's not much we can control. So what if we work really hard? We'll never build enough wealth to buy property here and establish some semblance of economic stability for our future family. We just can't. For most of us, we can't. So what if we fight for justice? We'll never get through the bureaucracy to make any lasting change. It seems as if control over our future, our generation, millennials and Gen Zs, control over our future is diminishing day by day, and it is being replaced by a growing sense of dread, right? Because it's related. Fear is rooted in a desire for control. It's rooted in a desire for control. I don't think the tenants were driven to do what they did because of greed. I think they were driven to do what they did because of fear. And when they were presented with the one opportunity to remedy that fear, which is to take more control, they seized it and they rejected the Son. Why can I say this? Because this parable is about Israel, okay? And all you have to do is look at the history of Israel to know what they did. The Israelites didn't reject God because of greed. They rejected God because they were scared. During the time of the judges and then the time of the kings, the leaders of Israel continually led the whole nation into idolatry, and they set up all these different places of worship to different gods. Why? Have you ever thought about why these kings set up all these altars? Political leverage? Political favor, perhaps? If you worship the same gods as these other nations, does that increase your chances of making political alliances and maybe even trade agreements with them? Maybe. And then, the prophets were sent, and the prophets are the servants that you read about in this parable. But the prophets are sent, and they go to the kings, and they say, you got to stop building these idols. You can't do that. You can't be worshiping all these other gods. And the kings, of course, are like, are you kidding me, religious man? You stay in your corner. You do your temple thing, your religious thing. Let me run this nation. These idols, they give me this political power. They give me this political access. So you stay in your lane, I'll stay in my lane, and I'll run this kingdom the way I see fit. They rejected God because they were scared. And they thought that the best way to remedy that fear is to try and control. Don't trust God to deliver us from our enemies. No. We got to trust in these other nations. We got to make alliances with these nations. They will protect us. Don't trust God to provide for us. No, we should trade with these nations. We have resources. They have resources. Let's trade. Who needs God? The best way to protect ourselves is to take control of our destiny and do things ourselves. And so they rejected God because they sought control, and it led to their downfall. Let me pause. I want you all to turn back to your table groups, okay? Or not table groups, your circle groups. And I want you to discuss this second question next few minutes. Think about that fear that you mentioned in the very beginning of the night. How is the fear that you mentioned related to a loss of control? How is the fear that you mentioned related to a loss of control? And in what ways have you been trying to gain control over this area? You may not be able to share with the whole group, so maybe pair up into groups of 3 or something. But let's take the next few minutes and talk about this, okay? Let's cue the music and... No. What time? How much time? do we have?
5:15 to like 4-5 minutes.
You guys good? All right, guys, there's going to be more time to continue processing. I'm glad that you are continuing to process. Keep this fear in your mind, okay? Like, I want this to be super practical for you. So keep thinking, keep it in your head as you listen to the rest of this talk, okay? Your specific fear and how it relates to control and how you are attempting to get more control in this area of your life, okay? So I'm going to continue. All right, that's your cue to stop talking. There will be more time, I promise. There's more time at the end. So what now? I want to give you some practical. Wow. Awesome. So there's one thing that's very certain about what we shouldn't do, which is to follow the example of the workers and of the Israelites, right? Who thought that they should take every opportunity to gain more control, even if it led to their downfall. But actually, to understand what we should posture ourselves or do in our lives, I think we got to go back into the history of Israel again and use Israel as an object lesson. So early on in the history of Israel, all right, pay close attention. This is the one part to pay close attention to. God had implemented a system of offering, okay? You might know it as the tithe. And before you kind of roll your eyes and say, oh, Kevin's just begging for more money. No, I'm not going to send a love offering around. Maybe I will. No, I won't. But the tithe was implemented to remind people that Israel, that God is the owner of everything. And here's how it worked. Israel was an agricultural society, which means that their economy was based on crops that they would grow. And here's the thing about growing crops. It's largely dependent on external factors, to which the farmers had little to no control over. So they could cultivate the land, they could put as many nutrients as they can into the soil, but if there's a drought, well, they're not growing any crops. Or if there's ample rain, it's a rainy season, well, one freak storm and all the crops are gone. I guess what I'm saying is that someone's wealth would fluctuate year by year by all of these external factors, these external obstacles like the weather or like natural catastrophes. And it was actually more than this. The way the tithe worked is that on a specific day, on the lunar calendar, okay, they followed the lunar calendar, kind of like us, not the solar calendar, but on the lunar calendar, on the very first day, on a specific day, the Israelites would go out onto the fields and they would look for any of the crops that had budded. And they would tie some string around it, and that would be the crop that is dedicated for the offering. So it wasn't a percentage thing. Just any crops that had budded would be tied off for and marked for the tithe. And the thing is that because it was the lunar calendar, there were years when that day would fall earlier in the harvest season. And there are some years where it would fall later in the harvest season. Now, if it fell earlier in the year, well, there'd be less crops that would have budded. And the amount that would be given for the tithe is like 5% of the total yield. But when that day falls later in the harvest season, that tithe might be like 25% of the total yield. But the workers were not to worry about the actual yield for the entire harvest season. They didn't have to project how much they thought they would get and then calculate 10% of that specifically. No, all they had to do, all they did was simply take what had budded on a specific day. Now, here's a question for you. Did God need that offering? Did he need a grain offering? Was God going to starve if the people didn't give him that grain offering? No, not at all. But something happened every time the Israelites marked off the crops dedicated for the offering. They would realize that as much as they worked, God owned everything. It's like when I buy something, like a really nice gadget for a friend, something that I want for myself, maybe the new iPhone 12. And when I'm in the act of wrapping it, I'm hit with the realization that that gift isn't going to be mine. Before the iPhone, there was an iPod. All you could do was listen to music. Unbelievable. But there's a realization that gadget is not mine. That's what the Israelites experienced every single harvest season. A whole day where they would mark off different crops to be offered to God because it reminded them of their place as stewards and not as owners. A steward merely manages what has been given to them. They don't actually own anything. This might sound crazy to ask, but could the offering have been of greater benefit to the people than for God? Could a continual practice of remembering that God is in control free the Israelites from their fear of a lack of control? I think so. I really think so. Now, what's this mean for you and me? Well, the farmers, they didn't try to control the future. They stewarded what was already given to them. When they tied off the crops dedicated for the tithe, they didn't worry about how much the rest of the harvest season would yield. That was in the future. What they knew was that on that particular day, the crops that had budded were to be offered to God as a tithe. That's it. That's all they knew. They didn't ask what if questions, which we're probably thinking right now. What if, after dedicating these crops, a freak storm comes in and destroys everything and I'm left with nothing? No, they didn't think that way. All they thought was this: hey, all these crops that have budded, they belong to God. That's the tithe. That's my responsibility as a steward. And therein lies the big idea of tonight. We don't make it our goal to control the future. Instead, we steward what we have in the present. I don't know if you've ever worked with a colleague like this, but I just want you to, I want you to imagine working with someone like this. Imagine a colleague who constantly wants more authority and control. You guys are all thinking of a specific person, I'm sure. They want that promotion. They want that title. They just want to control everything. But the problem is they don't actually finish the responsibilities and the tasks that have already been given to them. In fact, you're probably finishing all their tasks for them as they try to strive for a promotion or something, right? Unfortunately, I think that's the way most of us live our lives. We yearn for more and more control because we want stability, because we're scared, but we don't actually steward what we've already been given. Now, that's going to be a little different for all of us because we all have different fears. But let's take, for instance, someone who is scared of never finding someone in the future to marry. What would it look like if you stopped trying to control what you don't have, the future, and you started to steward what you already have? What would it look like if you stewarded your singleness? This is a period of time where you can just up and go. You can go on mission. You can go do outreach. I'm not saying you can't do this when you're married or when you have a family, but there are definitely greater limitations on your time. So while I think most of us understand this concept of stewardship versus ownership, the problem is I don't think we actually believe it in our hearts because we don't actually live as stewards. See, I think something happens when you start to focus on how to steward what is already in your life rather than trying to control what isn't yet. You grow content. And when you grow content, Paul says in the book of Philippians that you can face any and every situation because your trust is finally placed where it should be. Not in your ability to control the future, but in the God who controls it all. You can believe that in your head, you can know that in your head, but until you start to steward what is in your life right now, you will not actually live it out and believe it in your heart. So here's how I want to end tonight. I want you to talk one final time in your circle groups. This is it. With the specific fear that you've highlighted, how can you better approach it as a steward? With the specific fear that you mentioned in the beginning of the night, how can you approach it as a steward? Actually, you know what? Before talking in your groups, spend a few minutes just processing this in your head. How can you approach your fears as a steward? And then after that few minutes, you can start talking amongst one another. The band will come up and start to play some music to guide us, to lead us. But take this time to process by yourself and then maybe with the group afterwards, okay?